John Simpson took a great catch against Pakistan at Lord's, and it made me think of the Honourable Colonel Charles John Coventry. He's one of our weirded cricketers, and I don't just mean because he comes from quite a famous family, or the fact he was involved in a raid that kind of helped the Boer War happen. In 1888, he made his first-class debut, batting at number 10 and not bowling. His second first-class game was a couple of weeks later. He batted 11 this time and also didn't bowl. They were his only first-class games, and as such, they were also his only 2 test matches. They also happen to be what we refer to now as South Africa's first 2 tests. Going through Coventry's record at Cricket Archive, and it's clear that he was, an ordinary player at best, even at the lower level of cricket. He represented Worcestershire before they were a county side, which is why he didn't play any first-class games. But he also doesn't show anything of particular note when playing for Worcestershire either. He played most of his matches for teams like Isingari, which is Eton's old boys, I suppose, and Lord Sheffield's 11 versus the Parsees, and these sorts of games. And even going through them, I never found a game, even at the lower level, where he made more than 33 not out. Occasionally he took wickets, but usually it was against his own side when he played against Worcestershire, or when he was playing against a team who had like 22 players in it. And here's a tip for you if you're ever doing cricket history: if you see a team with more than 11 players, chances are they're rubbish. And Coventry is an England test player because of a factor of different reasons. Obviously, he came from very good stock and the right kind of family, as someone from the ECB might once have said. But also, the best English players didn't really go to South Africa at that time. South Africa weren't seen as a good enough team to send your best players. And we think of them as tests now, but they were not tests at the time. In fact, anyone could call a match a test if they wanted to back then. These matches were only reclassified as tests later on. In fact, all the early tests weren't actually tests at the time, although they were probably called tests at the time. It was Clarence Moody, the South Australian journalist, who just kind of decided on a list of test matches, and then it became canon. And I don't want you to think I picked Coventry just on his own. There have been lots of players who have represented the national side who probably shouldn't have. Vizzy captained India, largely because Vizzy also funded the tour. There have been East Pakistani players who played for Pakistan because the games were in what we would now call Bangladesh, and they needed a token player to play for them. And the truth is that right throughout the history of cricket, there have been players who have not been in their team's best 11 or best 15, sometimes even in their best 100, who have gone on to represent their nation. And why am I bringing all this up? Because we're in a period now where this is going to happen more and more. We've just had the England second 11 absolutely dust up the Pakistani first team. And of course, this one is not purely because of choice or because of how posh the players are from England. Or, as far as I'm aware, Phil Salt is not funding the England campaign. And this one's about COVID, which is still kind of about the business of sport, because they could have just decided not to play it with all of England's best players not available, but that's not how we do modern sport, so on we go. But what this gives us a glimpse of is perhaps the future of international cricket. More players who are clearly not in their team's best 11, 15, 25 players will get caps. Through injuries, through rest rotations, through dual international teams. Whatever it is, we're going to see a lot more international players because we've got 3 formats and we've got a lot of cricket to pack in. In 2017, Australia played 2 internationals a day apart on different continents. A T20 in Australia and a test match the following day in India. India's about to do something quite similar against Sri Lanka, where they've got a team of second choice players who are essentially going to be representing the nation. And it wasn't that long ago that England was resting test players during the World Test Championship because they had a World Cup to prepare for. COVID has obviously played a major role in some of this, although the Australian situation was before we became, amateur epidemiologists. But with franchises, specifically the IPL and T20 internationals, there's just been too much cricket for quite some time now. Think of some of the 3 format players now. Steve Smith and Babar Azam and Kagisa Rabada. They're just on this constant treadmill of top international sport or top franchise sport playing again and again and again. And we have had periods where people have played a lot of cricket, like county cricket used to play a phenomenal amount. They had seasons where 30 games was the norm. But by the 1960s that had died down a little bit because we had limited overs cricket come in, which still meant that the players had to travel and move around as much, just maybe didn't have quite as much playing time. But back in those days, there was 90 days of domestic cricket over about 6 months. A modern county team plays around about 80 days of cricket. But in those days, the players did have off seasons, especially from county cricket. And also, county cricket hasn't been the pinnacle of the game since really the Second World War. So that means even if you're an overseas player and you're a county star and then you have to go and represent your team, you could coast a little bit in county cricket. Like when racist fans threw bananas at Joel Garner. Up until that point, he was kind of just bowling within himself. He did not bowl within himself after the bananas. Or you had situations like Franklin Stevenson, and he knew he was an overseas pro and he was going to be over bowled, so he developed the skill to bowl off spin, which weirdly led to him kind of developing the modern off-cutting slow ball. Top players just found a way of getting through county cricket without taking too much out of their bodies. And that's because they could play in fourth gear and still make a lot of money. That's not the case when you're playing international cricket more often than not. You're usually having to put everything you can in physically and mentally to make the most out of your career. Add the IPL on top of that, and it's exactly the same, except in the IPL, one bad season might mean that you could lose 80 to 100% of your salary the next year. So you really have to make sure that you're rolling when you hit that tournament. This means that the best players in the world now are on at full speed for even longer than they have ever been before in cricket. And if you're a national body, you have to take care of these cricketers. This is your bread and butter. And for teams like India, England, and now New Zealand, they have some extra depth. They have a bit of a cushion that some of the other teams don't have. But look at Australia. They're so dependent on Smith, Warner, Stark, Cummins, Hazelwood. It's hard for them to rest them and win consistently. And there's probably an even more stark example of this than Australia. Pardon the pun. South Africa have two consistent match winners, Quinton de Kock and Kagiso Rabada. Those two guys have to play like almost all of their games. And Rabada himself is just such an interesting one because he's the most overused fast bowler in the world, or at least he was before COVID. For any other team, he'd be rested more because he'd be a precious asset. But South Africa can't rest him. Their team is just not good enough to rest a player of his quality, and they have the quota system. Resting him is a complication of which, takes a lot of advanced maths to work out. And the easy thing to say is that Rabada shouldn't be playing in the IPL, but that's where he makes most of his money. South African cricket are never going to be able to pay him that money. They can't really force him not to play, and if they try and force him not to play, they're causing bigger problems for themselves. And if Rabada has to be rested, and he is going to have to rest because he's a fast bowler, and there's many other players out there that also need rest, they're not going to get rested from the IPL or even the PSL or any of the big leagues that pay them a lot of money. They're going to have to be rested from international games. I think a small part of New Zealand's success came from the fact that they have so many test specialist players in their lineup. Those players don't play a lot of tests because New Zealand don't play a lot of tests, and so they're rested a lot of the times, and they're not playing, and they're not jumping on planes to go from league to league to league to make their money. They're just playing test cricket, and they're fully fresh when they play it. That's a huge advantage. And it's obvious for fast bowlers like Rabada why they need extra rest. But it's not just the super fast guys. The medium fast guys as well, they need to have their bodies fit. And it's very hard to be fit if you're a professional seamer. Spinners have problems with wrists and fingers and elbows. And batters have problems with their backs, but also need to be mentally fresh to make all the good decisions that they're supposed to make as professional batters in test match cricket or international cricket or even the IPL. So we know that by overusing our players, we won't get as much out of them. But the other thing is that India, Australia, and England specifically play too much cricket. Even after COVID, we didn't sit back and go, whoa, maybe we need to rethink this schedule. We just kept trying to fit these series in wherever we could. In India's case, even if they have to play two at the same time. And major teams are going to play as much cricket as possible. And yes, I know what you're saying. Oh, it's about money. It's more than about money, though. These teams are using that money to develop their players. It's about improving scouting and diets and psychology and medical and coaching and all the little things that the sport industry needs to get the most out of these players, the 1%ers. That's where the money goes. If by cramming another series into your schedule it means you can find another Steve Smith or Virat Kohli in a place you hadn't previously looked, then that's a huge win for your team. And the best chance of getting more money is quite simply by hosting more games. That's why teams keep cramming them in as much as they can. Now, it's also true that by having extra games, you're actually devaluing the product a little bit. Especially by putting out second 11s or third string teams at times. A casual fan who's expecting to see Jimmy Anderson might be upset to see, Lewis Gregory bowling. And they'll just switch over to the rugby or the, axe throwing competitions, rather than watch your 11th best bowler go up against an ordinary opposition. So we've kind of covered the business side of it there, but what about the cricket side of it? There is a huge thought in international cricket that the best players should represent their national teams. I don't think I'm, covering any new ground with that one. But it's also never been completely true, has it? And I'm not talking about Charles Coventry here. I would say that more often than not, a team has a young project player that they're trying out and that they would be able to find a better 32-year-old, but they think that the 22-year-old might have a higher upside going ahead. Not to mention when you're playing in different places, you might pick a bowler who's not in your 10 best bowlers, but might suit those pitches, or batters who are not in your best 6 batters in the same situation. I wonder how often international teams actually go in with their best available 11, rather than just 11 they've picked with a bit of an eye now in the future or something to do with the conditions. And there are actual benefits to having a dual team, or in England's case, trying out a second 11. They get live development at the top level. They get to see more players, they get to understand them, and they actually get to improve those players by giving them better opposition under tougher conditions. We may not like it, but I would think dual international teams like what India is doing is actually a tactical advantage if you can pull it off. It's certainly one up on teams who just can't do it because they will lose every game. It allows you to rest good players, it allows you to develop other players, perhaps it even allows you to try different game plans. And all the while you have the ability to continue to make extra money to help develop all your players, the A team, the B team, the C team, the main team, all the teams. And Diet England have made full-fat Pakistan look absolutely ridiculous at times in this series. And that is a concern for, well, Pakistan firstly, but maybe also global cricket. This isn't a terrible Pakistan side. It has Shaheen Afridi, one of the best bowlers in the world, and Babar Azam, an incredible ODI batter. Those are special talents, but at the moment, it's Pakistan who's playing like the B team, not England. And we could see exactly the same situation when Sri Lanka go up against India based on Sri Lanka's recent form and India's recent form with their backups when they played at the Gabba. And this is a particularly new. If you go back to the 90s, Australia A were incredible against Zimbabwe, England, and also Australia, almost winning that series. And while the West Indies never did this, our West Indies A team probably would have been the 4th or 5th best team in the world for a good chunk of the 80s as well. So it's not like any of this is new, it's just becoming more of the new norm. I mean, it's a great story watching John Simpson run around and take a leg slip catch while he's wicket keeping off the full face of the bat, especially as he did it at Lords, his ground that he's played at for years for Middlesex. In another era, as a keeper batter, he probably plays a lot more for England. But being that they seem to like batter keepers or just batters at times, it's been hard for him to even get a chance. And based on the way that England pick their players, you'd have to say he's about the 7th choice wicketkeeper. So it's a great story for him. But it's a weird situation for modern cricket. The days of Charles Coventry being selected are probably completely over, or at least hopefully. But the days of rest, rotation, and simultaneous series, they're right here, right now. It's no longer about your best 11. It's about depth charts, deep squads, and dual teams.